Loneliness. Loneliness to me is an expression of our ego deciding how we should feel. Our ego controls how lonely we feel, if at all, and there's no actual requirement that we spend time with other people or have close relationships. That is all an expectation we put on ourselves, and it's an expectation put onto us by society. Society requires those social requirements on our existence and our value. Society says you are a more valuable, worthwhile person if you have people around you. And we feel lonely when we fail to meet that societal expectation and have people around us. Now, that's one angle. The other angle is that loneliness is genuine craving and grief for the company of others. And we say to ourselves, without the company of others, I have no value or connection to the world. And so we feel that loneliness. And so loneliness is something we feel as a form of human grief. And it's a form of feeling a failure. And it's put on us to feel lonely by society because society constantly impresses on us that we have more value and place in the world and only when we are a part of the life of others in a close partnership, or we have a certain number or type of friendships in our community. Loneliness is a form of self-punishment, as we feel the longing for other humans and connections that we cannot find or make, or are otherwise absent, where we have failed to meet our own perceived standards, and so we are grieving by feeling lonely. During loneliness, we long for the company of others and all those close connections, even though those connections are connections that we cannot achieve for one reason or another. Loneliness is a form of perfectionism, dissatisfaction. If we could feel our own life and being alive was good enough, we might not feel any of the forms of loneliness. I think you can overcome loneliness when you don't focus on yourself and your own needs, and you put your mind into a project which is bigger than yourself.
Oh yes, I've come up with this theory about loneliness, and I've decided loneliness is now something which we could almost consider is a faulty thinking process, because it doesn't necessarily have to occur. I know, it's sort of like any negative thinking pattern. At times we can't sort of prevent that, but when we can step back and think about it more logically, it is a pathway that you can avoid. So, avoid or reform so that you don't go there. Anyway, I've just worked this out because I have been suffering from loneliness, but then I realized what it's about. It's actually a projection of my ego expectations. Like in the community, that I'm living in a Western society, urban city, whatever, and I feel the expectation on me and on each other in this community. Everyone's sort of watching everyone else and looking at everyone else up and down. Now, you encounter this everywhere you go, don't you? But it's a little bit more or a little bit less, a little bit different everywhere you go, isn't it? So anyway, in this town that I'm in, I don't want to name names, but in this town, it's quite a profound issue. And it's actually, there's almost a thing, and it's not just in this town, but it's in general in Western society, that we have this expectation people are to be social. And if they're not, they're defective. Okay, there's a problem with them. So they've failed. Anyway, and I feel that so much because I have never really excelled in this area. Like my social relationships are never really so good. And in fact, I feel a terrible fail in that whole area because I can't seem to find people who want to just hang out, and I haven't got ongoing long-term relationships anymore with friends that I know particularly. I don't know, the friends I used to know, they just don't know me anymore. I haven't seen them for years, or there's just that black hole of time which has been now maybe 10 or 15 years. Some of them I haven't spoken to, so to me they're no longer in my life as friends. I wouldn't call them a long-term friendship because we just never associate. So they're just people that I've met. Now I put them all into this category of people that I've met but I failed to engage in a long-term relationship or friendship with. So all those are fails. That's all my fails. And so I'm going along and I always just have fails. But anyway, I've just decided, that's just the way my life has been. And, it might be unfortunate and everything, but I guess you have to make the best of it. And so anyway, I don't really beat myself up about this fail too much, but I notice that society beats me up about it, and society will be angry at me about it, and new friends won't want to be my friend because they see I don't have any other friends, so they think, well, I'm not going to be your friend. And there it is, a vicious cycle which should never end. So, I'll just never be accepted by my first friend who to have a long-term friendship with because they're so intimidated I don't have other friends or something. See, so it's a little bit of a vicious cycle there. But, there's a trap for me or for anybody who finds themselves in this situation. The trap would be you would become depressed and start to, feel a failure and become more depressed, feel lonely and have lots of loneliness and angst and, just wanting to have those friendships and have those prospects and all those things that you think, society wants you to have. And, well, they do want you to have because they won't include you if you don't have them. So you're getting a lot of feedback there that, yes, you are a fail and it's all so bad and it's really depressing and such a lonely life. But anyway, so I do realize that it's a whole cycle of thinking there. It is a thinking cycle, okay? So I've decided loneliness is more like a thinking cycle based on an ego, because it's just ego that says you have to have social interaction, you have to have a social life, you have to be socially successful, or you're not, your life is not worth living. It's not allowed to be worth living. We don't want you. You've got nothing to offer. It's going to class you. So anyway, I don't know. I've done a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of research. I've had quite a productive life, I think. I never do nothing. I'm always doing something, and I always think of how can what I'm doing be a benefit to humanity. I don't know. I guess I try not to be selfish. People think I'm selfish, and I think I can be selfish too, but I always sort of think, how can what I'm doing be a benefit to humanity? So I don't think that makes the things that I do selfish. Yeah, so I feel I'm quite useful to society, to the world, but I don't have that social group, that social life that society wants and expects me to have. So from time to time, I feel at a loose end and all alone and sad, and I put those expectations pretty heavily on myself. Oh, I failed again. I failed. It's coming up for Christmas. I didn't even organize anybody to do anything with. Oh, I'm such a fail. And then the fail idea sort of moves along to Oh, my social expectation. What do I say that? Because loneliness is social longing, and social longing is really fueled by the expectation that we have a social need. But if you can be at peace with what you're doing in every moment and be happy with yourself and happy with your life, then you don't have longings for anything. If you can feel that it's okay to spend a night alone doing your own thing, it's sort of like you shouldn't feel guilty and you shouldn't have social longing to create loneliness and negative feeling and depression and angst and whatever. So anyway, this is sort of like a psychological approach, which sort of like sums up, I guess, where I go with these things. I don't like spending a lot of time on my own, but I've got so much I'm doing. I've got all these things I've got to do. So I guess I don't let myself spend too much time feeling bad about it. It's also a fact that I live in a society and people will have neighbours. I have neighbours, I live in a street. It's not like people don't know how to find me. So, I also have an expectation that the community should be inviting me and trying to include me. They see I'm all alone. Well, they should be bloody inviting me to something, shouldn't they? Or there should be something sort of like dangled in front of me every so often, which is a social thing that I can get involved with. Yeah, so anyway, that's just one thing. I'll just make a quick note. Now, the other thing to note is that you can get so busy that you don't have time to plan the proper, appropriate way to build up a social network. And I feel I'm succumbing to this. I always succumb to this. Once I've got too many things to do that's on my plate, which is really bugging me, then I'll just spend all my time working on them and close off from everything else, because I tend to be a bit of a workaholic, panic motivated workaholic. So once I get in that mode, I don't really have any interest in pursuing these other things which are going to build a social life. I don't even think of them. I put all my thinking power into solving this bugging problem. So I think that's where I've been a lot of the time. I've just been trying to solve something and don't spend any time working on my social situation, building it up. One thing I should have done is join one of those support groups, but I'm not sure. I never seem to find the right one. The Alcoholics Anonymous group is a group which I think is really good, and I've been to a couple of their meetings, but unfortunately they're only for people who are admitted alcoholics. Now, I'm not an alcoholic and they won't let me join. They know I'm not an alcoholic and they don't let me go to their meetings. So I've been sort of like told, I'm sorry, but we can't accept you because you are not an alcoholic. So unfortunately, they can't accept me, but I liked their group. I liked the honesty and the disclosure in their group, and the supportiveness, and the whole attitude of everyone there was just, we're here to help each other. I really liked that group. But anyway, they won't let me in their group. There's other groups, I can go to other groups. It's just that when I get bogged down with a big problem, I spend all my time on that, and I don't really put my time in other things. In fact, I'll break appointments just so I can keep working on the thing that suddenly is more important than everything else. And that's a little bit of a trap, one of my own personal little traps. But I do acknowledge there are ways to find a social circle and try and make a social circle or have social occasions and all of that. And I know there are different ways and processes to do that, and mainly it's just like finding a group which you're interested in, which meets regularly. That's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. And then you can go along and see other people and you'll be doing whatever it is, the class or the martial arts lesson, whatever it is that you're doing with other people. That's where, you can potentially meet new friends and make a new social circle. So I am aware that is a logical way, but I just get too busy sometimes, which I am at the moment. And there's also, that's not a priority. Well, anyway, it should be. It should always be. I mean, there's two paths out of loneliness. There's the I can accept and tolerate it, which I've just explained, and that's about accepting that it's a psychological syndrome. It's a way of thinking. I'm lonely, when it's not actually true. You're being impressioned upon by your ego. Your ego's pushing on you that there's an expectation for you to have a social circle, to do something socially, to be sociable, to have people around you, but you don't actually need them. Okay, you've got a bookshelf full of books that you want to read and 4 hours time. Why are you lonely? You could read that book, keep your mind occupied. You don't necessarily have to be lonely, right? So getting into this thing, loneliness is almost like a choice because we feel pressured by our ego to fit into the social pressure, the social expectation. You must have a social life. You don't need a social life. Nobody needs one. Nobody. So anyway, I'm just going to remember that's one way out of loneliness, and the other way is, of course, to build a social circle. So, you've probably got to be able to do both, because you need to be able to spend time alone without feeling miserable, and then you also want to make connections with people, don't you? We all do. We all want to have connections with people. Once I get time, I'm looking forward to going along to little groups in my community and meeting new friends.